All right, we're live. We have a special production assistant here with us today. Say hi, Rachel.
Hi.
All right. You can go control the camera now. It's a PDA day, PD day. For those that, like when we were kids, it was called a PD day.
Yeah. Now
Now it's a
PA
PA
day.
day.
Yeah.
It's just a professional development day for teachers. Maybe that's what the whole world calls it.
Maybe.
Ma-
I don't
Do you
know
think
what the
these?
A actually stands for.
That's a good point.
Day off.
Day off day. Anyway, so we have a production assistant with us today. We'll give it a couple more minutes for people just to hop on to the recording, but we're going to be talking about brand expression in the digital space anyway.
Yep.
So yeah, I guess yeah. So all right, we'll get into it here. Thanks everybody for joining us. Let me go through a little bit of a structure of what we're going to talk about here today. So this is part of our digital workshop series. We do them once a month, half an hour at noon, third Thursday. Sort of a quick tip meant to help everybody boost their overall digital experience. So put it in your calendar, keep an eye on it, sign up for our newsletter if you want to make sure you're on top of each topic. But we've got the whole year already planned. So I'll leave it at that. We'll do quick introductions and then just kind of take a temperature from people and check in and see kind of what energy we've got with us today. And then we'll get into the actual exercise and the topic that we're going to be talking about. So do you want to say hi, Ollie?
Hi, Ollie. Oliver Morehouse.
That's it.
That's it.
All right. And I'm Scott Snowden. We're both partners here at Flywheel. Sometimes you see my colleague Stephen with us, but Oliver, does drive sort of the designing and the planning and the shaping services that we deliver at Flywheel. So I thought, subject matter expert, Ollie.
Yeah. and haven't done a workshop in a while, so looking forward to talking about this.
All right, good. And that's enough about Flywheel. You know what we're doing here. Okay, so as we go here, give us some engagement in the engagement buttons and the like buttons down below. Let us know if what we're talking about is resonating with you. But start by letting us know sort of what is your biggest digital brand expression challenge. Do you have an opinion about this, Ollie? What do you think is the biggest challenge for people trying to express their brand in a digital space?
It's probably consistency, really, and getting like all the people that are involved coordinated to understand like what it is, what is actually the intent, and how all the different audiences actually perceive that brand.
Okay, so consistency.
Yeah.
I guess that I would agree with because in my mind, my own answer was going to be just really not even thinking about this properly. Like I think people get too much into the tactics and the doing of putting content up and being present on social media, and they kind of completely neglect or forget, okay, hold on a second, run it through that brand filter.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, because like how it feels can cut across all the different things you're doing, and is the important part of what the brand's all about. So.
Right. Okay, so let us know. Put a comment in, hit the check-in button. We'd appreciate it. Okay, so let's get into the topic, how to boost your digital brand expression. We've got a little exercise. So we give out a resource in every one of these workshops. So here's the link, flyw.co/dxbrand. And I'm sure we have at least one or two staff that are on the broadcast here that can pop that into the chat for us. So let's take a quick look at that. It looks like this. Let me go to page 1. So just to give you an overview of what you've just downloaded, what we're going to be going through is this template. So it starts on the first page with an outline of your brand attributes. And again, like all these workshops, this is a guide, right? So adapt it to your own circumstances. Don't take this verbatim, but use it as a way to sort of guide your thinking and the approach. So first, we're trying to capture some information about your brand, what it stands for. And then on the second page, it's kind of like a scrapbook. We've got some options here for you to sort of collect some proof points about how your brand is currently being expressed. And then the third page takes you through that mental exercise of doing that self-expression assessment. Okay, so filling in the gaps between how you want to actually show up, and then what's actually happening.
Yeah, and it's really about like the situation as it is. Like we don't need to get into redefining the brand in this sort of exercise, but it is around what does it work, what does it look like right now, and what's sort of the intent. That first page, how does it play out in real life? The second page, and then how do we feel about it, and is it doing what we want to do?
Awesome. Okay. So before we get into the specifics, and I know that we spend a lot of time on these workshops talking about the context for the workshop and the activity. And we do that because I think that the tool itself is self-explanatory. And now that I've just shown it to you, if you want to drop off and take that and go, great. I think that the real message here is, why do we even pick this as a topic that we think is worth talking about? And what can you do with it? So Ollie, like, what are some of the biggest challenges that you think? I mean, we touched
Yeah.
on it a moment ago, but why don't more brands do this effectively? Where's the stumbling points? Why does this not get advanced?
Well, I think like if we think of the biggest examples, a lot of people have heard or maybe even experienced like the brand police,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so, okay, great. There can be a very formal and rigid structure to sort of enforce it. But for a lot of companies where that isn't there, it's really just about effective alignment and coordination. And
Right.
so, sort of one of that big challenge is just like getting the context of what even is the brand, what are the elements, and how does that play out? Because it's not necessarily part of everybody's day. And so we do this as very much an alignment type tool.
Yeah.
Right, to acknowledge that it's more than just a logo, that there's lots of different components, and in particular that the perception of it across the different audiences can be a bit different, and there's no right and wrong. It's very subjective, and so if you're able to like coalesce that into something that you can then share internally, you can get much better buy-in. You can actually deliver it and actually make some tangible results without blowing the budget,
Right.
like breaking the bank, and not necessarily having to employ like brand police. Though those can be effective.
So, I mean, I get where you're going there, and we're kind of picking on the brand police uh, in jest there, but I actually think that there's a balance. You actually want some brand policing, and that's why you do this
Yeah,
also. And this is a way to kind of not necessarily police yourself, but keep yourself honest and coordinated and consistent.
yeah. Like I think that scrapbook stage is where that becomes very apparent,
Right.
right? Like if you start going through that exercise and seeing how all over the place you are, it sort of points to, okay, well, we need a little bit more structure and rigor around this to actually make sure it's being implemented.
Yeah. And I also think that there's a lot of scenarios that clients and digital experience managers get into where they struggle to sort of defend what they need to invest in and how they need to be spending their time. And this is one of those things where, yeah, you can pop the blog post up, or you can build out your campaign that you've been, tasked to deliver, and it may seem on the surface level like it's a very rudimentary, straightforward thing to do, but there's a certain amount of rigor and attention to detail and intentionality that somebody who does this really well wants to bring forward. And what I like about this structure is that you can use it to sort of build a bit of a business case for yourself if that's needed, if that kind of support is going to help you be more effective in your role.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of pop that up and reveal what the gap is in a very tangible way.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so what do we want people to come away with? Like, what do you think is? I mean, we've got it up on the screen here, but these are some of those things.
Yep. Yeah, so like I think one, it gives a pretty straightforward framework to sort of identify and show rather than just tell what's going on and what the current situation is. it does allow you to give a tangible result for something that's maybe a little bit subjective, but allows people to sort of align on what that means. And I think like when I said the challenge was sort of consistency, you'll see it, and that's like consistency isn't of itself always good. Maybe you actually want to be variable and surprising, and but being intentional about it is important. And then it doesn't always happen overnight. It's like, well, like you just say, hey,
Right.
we're going to do this, and then boom, it's done. So managing that change over time across different people, and so on, it helps you work on it and get it done. And then if you do it over time, then it helps you sort of see a baseline and see where you can improve, and do you actually align to what you want
Right.
your experience to be by all the different audiences that you care about.
I would say it's also a good exercise to do when you're in the right headspace for it. So don't necessarily try and squeeze this in when you're rushing to deliver some sort of tactical campaign. We are sitting here at the beginning of a year, so like maybe that's the right headspace, but it can also just sort of, again, give you that baseline for what you want to do and how you want to set your priorities. Okay, sorry, were we going to say something else?
Well, I think we'll get into it once we look at it a little further.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so let's get into really the delivery of what we're advocating for here. So there's 3 steps to this. You want to just kind of touch on it?
So yeah, it's about the situation as is. So it's like formalizing your brand. It's sort of the intent of what your brand is. Now, this could, what to watch out for is not devolving into a whole brand exercise and redoing your brand at this point.
Right.
But the intention, however it is at the moment, of what your brand stands for and what you want it to be. Then 2, go out there and in the digital world specifically,
right,
sort of inventory that, see the details. That can be as detailed as like, what are the button shapes and like what are rollover effects. Like you can get that detailed, but it all gives a feel for how you show up digitally. And then sort of the self-assessment, not necessarily a good or bad, but on the spectrum of things, where do you line up, and how close is that to what you like to line up to?
So talk a little bit about that first step, like formalizing your brand attributes. That is, and like we were talking before we hit record that or broadcast, that it shouldn't be an exercise in creating your brand attributes. It should really be sort of taking stock. And I think we've seen scenarios in the past where that just kind of unravels if you're not careful.
Yeah, because like so a brand for any given company can be a lot of things. Like sometimes it is literally just a logo and there's no more thought put into it than that at the moment. And sometimes companies have a full brand book that doesn't just do logo, but full visual identity, tone and manner and writing, stance in sort of the world, basically. And it's a much more fulsome. So it's not that you need to necessarily be in any one of those places. All are valid, but where are you? And so it may also be unwritten. And so that can be a place where even just whether it becomes very formal, sort of having a bit of alignment on, okay, well, what are we trying to go for here?
Yeah. And so don't take this worksheet that we use too literally. If you don't have an answer for what are my key brand attributes, then just leave it blank and move on. You're trying to assess against what you know to be true. You're not trying to turn this into a branding exercise, okay? Because that can be very distracting. I think that's a good
reveal
it may
that
you've got a lot of other work to do.
You do want to go through that, but I think that is a bit of a different situation, right? Than saying, okay, how well do we show up digitally with the brand that we have?
Right. So talk a little bit more about that second step, that inventory of your digital brand. What are you looking for? You've mentioned a couple of examples, but describe that process again.
Yeah. So I think one is impression. So like in the different digital platforms that you show up in, whether it's your site, whether it's on social or other ways, email, what's the impression people get is their first impression. That's sort of one.
Right.
Then when they interact and use it, what kind of impression do they get there? So it's not just aesthetics. It's also like a bit of functionality. How does it look and feel as you work through it? And if there are some sort of major different flows for different audiences, or sort of a different feeling or stance you're trying to get across, then try to get out the pieces that sort of best represented. And it's really just shouldn't take too long going through and like taking screenshots and
Like,
and
what are
really
the consistent common elements that are good representations of where your brand is showing up effectively, but also when you're doing this,
and where it's
oh,
not.
that's where we're missing, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it is for you to take stock of the good and the bad, the opportunities and the good examples. So don't be just looking for those perfect examples.
Yeah, like it is meant to be representative,
Mhm.
not exhaustive,
Right.
but touch on, think about who's coming, the different ways they can come in, and start from there.
Okay. And so you've done that. You've got your formal brand attributes, and then and then you've done your inventory. So you've collected a bunch of proof points. And then that third step again is the self-assessment.
Mhm.
So we'll come back to the worksheet in a minute, but I think one of the most important things to articulate here is that it's not like there's a good or a bad. It's just how well aligned are you with where you want to be.
Yeah, and this is the most interesting part of it
Yeah.
is to get a sense of, okay, like there's always the sort of mantra of like differentiate versus competitors, right? As like a hey,
Yeah.
marketing, you need to do that.
You need to be, yeah.
And that is true in how you show up in a digital world. Sometimes that may not be true. It may be very good to sort of meet your competitors and say, we're not differentiating on this.
Right.
We're just as good.
Well, it might
Right?
be important for some brands to look like they belong to the club.
Exactly. Yeah.
And oh, there's a comfort and a familiarity there. And so your brand should emulate your industry, your market, your competitors.
Yeah. And it's a choice along all these different dimensions of the degree to which you want to align to competitors or differentiate,
Right.
or be very consistent with the experience, or be variable and surprising. Like
Right.
having something that is a nice surprise, right, that someone was not expecting in their experience, can go a long way to fulfilling your brand promise.
How many times have we sat in a boardroom with a client who has said, yes, I want to be different and surprising, only to show them a brand expression, a new concept that is on brand, but different and surprising, and them going, oh, no, I can't wear that suit.
Yeah, there's going to be,
it happens.
Yeah, it happens, and there's going to be sort of momentum that's involved, and yeah, it's a conversation, because there's also, that's the perception and feeling of someone internal knowing all they know. There's also, what does that feel like for the people from the outside?
Right. And so I guess just, make sure you're being honest with yourself about what you actually want and what you're ready to incorporate, because this becomes an extension of everything that your brand is. Awesome. Okay, so we do have an exercise here. You've seen the sheet. If you still need it, flyw.co/dxbrand will get you that a blank fillable PDF with our brand expression canvas. We are going to, just like a cooking show you the final result here in a minute. We took that template, and then sort of in context of one of our clients, the Inuit Art Foundation, we kind of went through this exercise. So do you want to tee this up for us, Ollie,
Sure.
and tell us about the Inuit Art Foundation and what this is all about for them?
Yeah, so we've worked with the Inuit Art Foundation for quite a while. They're an arts organization representing Inuit all across the world, really, in many respects.
The Arctic, yeah.
But in a Canada-based organization. And so one of the things that that's happened recently is the launch of Inuit Artist Portal. And so that's sort of the lens on which we're doing this exercise by. But for them, as an arts organization, like obviously aesthetics and visuals are highly
as a
important.
Visual organization, its brand must be on point. Yeah.
Exactly. And then because the range of geographic audiences and the different communities, there's need for low bandwidth and sort of high bandwidth and different forms of multimedia.
Yeah. So we've been able to, just to toot our own horn for a second, build something that comes through in a low bandwidth environment, that also comes through in a very multimedia rich environment, but is still well articulates, expresses the brand. Yeah, I don't think I just spoke English, but you got what I'm saying.
And then because some of the social media platforms have done so well with low band environments, that's a particularly important.
Yeah, they
area.
communicate a lot with their constituents through social media. So showing up effectively there is pretty important for them. Okay, so let's take a look at the final result here and talk through having used this document, this template in that context. All right, so here we have at the very top, their brand promise. So take us through just kind of a high level of sort of what this embodies, what this page is doing, and how you use this first section of the template.
Yeah. So brand promise, just sort of as I said, like, well, what do you stand for? What is it? What's the reason you exist, and what are you going for? So in Inward Art Foundation, and specifically with the portal, it's around artist self-expression, self-determination, and helping really to build on their careers in this case.
Right.
And so what's interesting here is like the brand, and they have brand guideline and so on. The brand has been around and established for quite some time. At the start of the process, we were actually really interested in this sort of Arctic char red color, because it really wasn't being used. So you check out the site before, like there was very much a stance of, hey, let the art speak for itself. Let's be understated. And so there was a bit of shyness around that, but it is well used in the portal, and it sort of helps signify. It's actually, they're using quite a bit more.
I guess another key part of it is making sure that you have somebody who, can assess this effectively for you as well. Make sure you're the right kind of person, or get a colleague to help you. I wouldn't have called that red. I think that's kind of orange, but maybe it's the screen.
Yes, it is definitely on the orange side of red, but
anyway, that's neither here nor there, but it does sort of emphasize that. Make sure if it works, you're doing this as a team. So, okay. So just to sort of finish the formalization here, not to get into the specifics, I think everybody understands sort of the intent of what this page is meant for. Even having filled this out as an example, how did you feel that thought exercise went for yourself?
So that point about doing with a team is important. So we've gone through this, or sort of the start of the project. There wasn't really a great moment right now, just sort of finishing it, to be like, hey, let's go back through this as a team. Right. So I was doing it sort of on their behalf.
Right.
And so that was not the greatest.
Right.
It would have been better to do that, but hopefully I've represented it well.
Well, we got the idea. So then, with that in mind, you've got that sort of at the forefront of your mind. If you have to take a break to come back to the inventory part, this page helps put you in that mindset again. So then, talk to me about going through and collecting some of these brand examples.
Yeah, so it's really around sort of the different ways that audiences can come in. So in the top left, that is sort of the initial impression that you get from the artist portal section, which has its own sort of wordmark logo as well. That was actually created sort of near the end of that process. Cool. To the far right, where that's a post on Facebook on sort of how they show up, and then some different pieces in between. So the funding is an important part of the new sort of service of the portal. And so how do you navigate that and understand that? And how do you, from their perspective, still make it feel and look in line with a highly visually engaging world, but also be functional?
Right.
So the different pieces and coming in from the perspective of artists who have maybe an existing relationship with the foundation, have a profile already published, a public profile already published, versus those that are new and just starting out, and everywhere in between. Couple of points to just bring out here. So that this bottom left is like very functional pieces, right?
Right.
So how do you tabs work in this? Do this month, do next month, rolling deadline as a sort of button feel. The load more and hover states and the pager and drop downs. So like what this.
You're also building a little bit of a brand kit too, to sort of guide other future projects, to say, here's a representative set of how our brand is expressed in reality.
Yeah, and what I think can come out of this is where some of these things don't mesh well together, right? Like
Right.
you look in one place and it looks very, very different than the other. I think that sort of minimal aesthetic, let the art speak for itself, is encapsulated well by those buttons. Like that's a
Mhm.
very minimal
Right.
sort of style, and the black and white as the predominant.
Okay, so
color.
great. So we've done our inventory, and I want to make sure we don't run out of time to sort of talk
Yep.
about the real sort of final step here, the culmination, and what we're all working towards. So talk a little bit about what we're looking at on these pages. We talked about it a moment ago, but we've kind of got this self-assessment here, and we've come up with some criteria that we often use. You want to just kind of take us through those points here, Ollie?
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of a risk and a bit of debate potentially around each of the different criteria and how they differentiate between themselves. I don't think it's worth getting into too much worry
Right.
about that. But like, yeah, so this is right. Okay, how familiar does the brand feel? How novel does it feel in the sort of whole world out there?
Right.
And at least in this assessment, feel like they're pretty on where they want to be as an arts
Right.
organization.
We're
and
not
sort
trying
of
to
in-
blend in perfectly with the milieu of all other arts organizations, but we still need to have that be the essence of the brand.
Yeah, exactly.
And if we might say so ourselves, we've done a good job of getting them there. So we're
Helping
aligned.
out, yeah. And so there's in that sort of whole world, in not just as arts organization and so on, but then specifically, okay, the competitors. And you could say, hey, what's sort of the competitor to the art foundation? But in terms of like, you can think of it as arts organizations or as representing artists or as a not for profit overall, and sort of how far. And this is the place where I'm like, okay, look, they are quite aligned in a lot of their digital expression. They come into that world pretty familiar. I think there is some opportunity there, not to be very different from competitors,
Right.
but to sort of ease off on that familiarity.
Okay. So again, spectrum here, and it's not saying that one end of the spectrum is better than the other. So
Mhm.
that's why there's 2 rows of radio buttons under sort of each one of these criteria. It's like, and I think you would do this kind of in 2 passes. It's like it's an assessment of that inventory. Okay, on these different criteria that you identify, use our examples if they help you. Use your own. Where do I think I stand? And then come back and go, okay, wait a minute, where do I actually want to be on that spectrum? Or maybe you do it in the reverse order. It's not necessarily you're doing this in a linear fashion.
And then this next one is very specific in the digital world because like,
Right.
we interact with technology all the time. And so like it can be like, how do you upload an image? You've probably done that thousands of times in various different platforms. So there is some degree of alignment around those other digital activities that don't have to do with the brand specifically, but are actually quite a big part of the experience, and can say a lot about your brand.
Yep. And so then we've got kind of some notes at the bottom here just for capturing those final thinking or synthesizing where you arrive to at the end of this exercise.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and sort of identify maybe a couple opportunities, not to outline a whole plan or anything, but to highlight it.
Right. Cool. That's half an hour.
Yeah.
That's a workshop for everybody. So hopefully you got a few bits and pieces of value out of that. Thanks for joining us. If you want to sign off now, you can. I've got a couple more questions for Ollie. So we're going to go, a few minutes into overtime here. Maybe talk a little bit about AI.
Sure.
It's the hot topic these days. So stick around if you want to for a few more minutes. So Ollie, one of the things that we are sort of paying attention to and the whole world is watching for is this whole concept of artificial intelligence, and chat GPTs in the news right now. How does this in your mind impact what we've just been talking about?
It's a little bit early, but it's interesting from a sort of inspiration and where to maybe steer away. So
Okay.
what's interesting, so we played obviously around with DALL-E 2 and like what can you create, but the basis of the AI is almost by default to create what is familiar,
Yep.
right? Because what it is doing is pulling together what already exists. And so almost by default, it is going towards that familiarity. So
Sure.
if you there can be for your own experience with it a surprise, and I'm not
Yeah.
like discounting that. When you experience it and see whatever it comes up with, you could be surprised. But then if you go a little bit further to say, okay, what is the craft in here? A lot of it's familiar. So there's a bit of a question of, okay, when you see those results,
Hmm.
do you take them to be inspiration to build upon the familiarity of it?
Right.
Or do you take those results to be, that is what's familiar. How can we be surprising if that's something you want to do?
Yep. Um, I think this is a great tool for the art of the possible, though, at the same time, because you can, I get it. You're saying like what it spits out is trained on a model, on a collective of information that's already consumed. And if you don't know how to guide the questioning and the inputs to the AI, then it'll just kind of spit back out to you it's sort of a confirmation bias. Like it'll just kind of give you back what you're already expecting.
Well, not even just what you're expecting, but because it's based on the information already out there,
Hmm.
there will be a predominance of points of data that are familiar.
Okay. Yep. Yep.
So it's
Fair
both
enough.
what you ask of it, but also what it's working with to generate what it is.
Okay, so I get it, but let me show you a
Yeah.
little exercise that I did. So this took me half an hour to run the exercise, use Dolly 2, and put the results into PowerPoint. So I was thinking, like, if we were sitting down to build a new digital experience or expression for a particular client, I thought, well, it would be really fun to use Dolly 2 to present concepts to help with the brainstorm and the conversation. So imagine that you are a financial service company. Okay. I said, first of all, give me a homepage example and a social media landing page that you would expect to find for a conservative financial institution. That's it. I said that. And it spat this back. Uh, it's wearing the corporate blue. These are,
Yeah.
these are sort of earthy tones. The social media gets a little bit more interesting and highlights a few brighter colors. I was like, wow, that's exactly kind of the tone that I would expect. I then said, do the same thing for something like more like a calming and whimsical loan provider. So something that, uh, you know, homeowner or something, might feel comfortable in this sort of daunting subject to approach. And it spat this out for me. So more playful. I guess this could probably be layered onto sort of any product or service, but you could, I thought, well, that's an interesting example. It without prompting, it included like home and garden and stuff like that. So kind of, I thought was relevant. I'm not sure where the Cookie Monster came in the top corner here.
Or
That
the
is,
strange
or the pig.
piggish thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it gave
Piggy
me,
bank,
but it
maybe.
gave me, that's a good point. It did give me all 4 examples all at once, right? And then I said, okay, fintech. Okay, no, I want to be a forward-leaning, futuristic kind of brand that is providing these loans or financial services, and it gave me these examples. So I just thought that based on that exercise alone, it was kind of it's kind of fun, it's kind of cool, and so beyond just the novelty of it, I can see how that might have some use. Would you agree? Is that something that, or do you think it's just, what do you think?
Well, so like I think it has some use and it's interesting to consider. Um, in There's a bigger question there about where is the line of inspiration versus like regurgitation.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And so I think there's a little bit of that. It doesn't hurt to do it. I personally wouldn't sort of like take that and be like, okay, yeah, that's the direction, because there's a bit of like motive question of like, okay, it's recombining these elements, but for what effect? And you can think of like there's other versions of this. There are platforms out there where you can say, hey, for all these designers, give me brands,
Right,
And
right,
you can
right.
get back like 20 different brands. Many of them will be regurgitated. Like we've
Yeah.
done examples of that. We're like, hey, this is the Acon logo, just with a different name. or
Right,
something,
right, right.
right. And so I think that's an important consideration of it, and also going through something like this kind of exercise of where intentionally you want to.
Right. So I think it helps kind of guide thinking and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's obviously not designing a website for you. Those are not like practical, usable designs. And so there's a lot more you have to do with it. But I don't know. It's kind of a neat way to say, hey, should we go in this direction or more in this direction?
Yeah, I think like it's especially useful if you were considering looking through a bunch of different templates, for example, and
Right.
like doing that exercise to be like, hey,
Yeah.
what's sort of the best like template that we can just use? Those are again things that already exist, or this gives a slightly better way probably to do that initial exercise. It's not going to give you a template you can just install,
Right.
but it's going to tell you what's familiar in that space based on what you've asked it.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Ollie. It was
Awesome.
fun.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Great
Yeah.
insights.
Thank you.
See you next month, everybody. Thanks for joining.